Hello and welcome to today's episode of Rawkode Live at the Rawkode Academy. I am Rawkode. That is 3 Rawkodes too many. Today we are taking a look at CueBlox, a actual personal project of mine and a friend and colleague, Brian Ketelsen. We're going to be guiding you through everything you need to know to do cool things with your data. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, comment to these videos, join the channel, and you'll get updates for all new episodes of Rawkode Live. We also have a course in flight on InfluxDB, so check out the options for joining the Academy. And there's also a rather active Discord server, over 500, nearly 600 people talking cloud native, Kubernetes, Go, Rust, all sorts of cool technology things. So come and join us, say hello, and I look forward to meeting you. Okay, that's the housekeeping over the way. Today, like I said, it's a personal project. Brian and I have been working on this for months and months and months, and we're both really excited to share it. Right, Brian?
This is really exciting. We've been iterating on this forever, I think, and it's starting to become something that feels right, which is awesome.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like I think we talked about it for a while before we even started building it, right? Like I think our conversations around this maybe started towards the end of last year, maybe a little bit earlier, where we both just had these like grand plans for like how we wanted our data to work, and just. It's been really cool watching this project change a lot over the last kind of 7 or 8 months. So,
yeah, I think my favorite thing about this particular project is the fact that we've been completely unafraid to evolve our implementations as we realize the way things are working didn't really meet our visions. And when the code takes you in the direction you don't want to be, it's totally okay to throw that out and start over. And we've definitely done that more than 5 times.
Yeah, I hadn't actually thought about that, but yeah, we experiment a lot, right? We're definitely tinkerers, always playing with new technologies and new tools. And I think we kind of take those learnings and experience and bring them back to what we're actually doing. So yeah, let's we kind of skipped a step here. For anyone that's not aware of you, Brian, can you give us a little bit of an introduction and tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure. My name's Brian Ketelsen, and let's see my nice little lower third there.
I'm going to turn your name off. That's it. You don't deserve my purple name anymore.
I'm a cloud developer advocate at Microsoft on Azure, and we focus on Linux and open source, all of the fun stuff. So I really enjoy my job because I get to do open sourcey, Linuxy things all day long for Microsoft and surprise people. I guess it's maybe less surprising now than it used to be, but Microsoft has a ton of open source, and we really enjoy contributing back to the community and helping people with their open source projects, running them anywhere, including Azure. And our team is full of contributors to all sorts of different OSS projects.
Yes, definitely not the Microsoft of the 90s. I'm always super impressed with the work coming out of Microsoft over the last 10 years. It's really refreshing and it's great to see. Plus, you're always hacking on weird things on Azure too. And in fact, there's been a couple of really cool experiments that you've done with CueBlox alone on Azure, which I found really interesting as well. Like you just seem to have this really cool way of being able to take stuff that should be run on like a real machine and making it serverless in some way, which is always exciting.
It's so funny because maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I was as anti-serverless as one can be. Just why in the world would you want to give up control of your code and how it's hosted? And now I don't want to host anything of my own at all. It better be in the cloud or I'm not going to run it. That's just, it's so weird how quickly I changed my mind on the serverless concept. And, I'm totally embracing the fact that I used to be anti-serverless and now I'm very pro-serverless. That it's okay to change your mind. It's okay to have new opinions and learn.
Yeah, I think the frameworks are also, I don't want to go into a pro-serverless conversation by any means, but serverless as a technology has improved so much as well over the last few years. Like you can now take Go binaries or Java applications, Python applications, whereas initially it was really just, here's a bit of JavaScript and we're going to run it in some way for you on this platform. So.
Yeah, it's definitely evolved a lot, and it's still evolving. I mean, most of the platforms where you can run things that aren't JavaScript, you have to do them over some sort of HTTP bridge. So we're way back in the 90s doing CGI again, and that's okay. It works and it's fun. It will evolve more, and that's fine.
Sweet. All right. So the topic of today is CueBlox. Do you want to give people the that Taylor thing is super cool. Do you want to give people the TLDR? If you got a pitch ready for it?
How does one do the TLDR of CueBlox? So CueBlox as a vision was started because we wanted a way to have a schema for our data that we could share in a group. So if you and I were talking about an event and that event happened to be described in a YAML file or a JSON file, we wanted to be able to share those events in our teams and our groups and be able to reuse them across the team without any crazy translation of your field names and my field names. So that was the beginning of the discussion that ended up with us writing thousands of lines of Go and learning Q and months and months and hours of work. And what we've ended up with is a way to define a schema for a record set and use that schema to validate your record set, including referential integrity between groups of records, and then publish it using all kinds of really interesting little tools that we've built along the way for publishing, and share that data among just yourself or among a team with published group schemas. We've got a lot going on in CueBlox. It's I don't know if there is a TLDR. There's certainly no elevator pitch.
Yeah, I mean, I think if anyone's watching this and they go, I have YAML data, or I have JSON data, or you have Markdown data with front matter, like if you want to be able to enforce a schema on that front matter or the YAML or the JSON, there are certain ways to do it right now, but none of them really provide, I feel, like the platform. I feel like CueBlox is turned into a platform to work with that data. And in fact, I'm going to pull up something that you created on the website that I just absolutely love. So
the pyramid?
The pyramid. There we go.
This is Maslow's hierarchy of data.
I think this pyramid does a really good job of explaining why people should be interested in CueBlox. We start with Markdown and YAML validation. I think that's one of the things that when you define a schema and you point CueBlox to it, you just get that by running a Blox validate command, and it just says, yeah, your data is good, or no, your data is bad.
Yeah, and at the basic level, that's a really great way to do things like validation for the front matter in your blog posts. Something really simple. You're not going to ship a blog post without a date or a title or an OG field, whatever it is that you've got in your blog that is important to make your website look good. Yep. You can use Blox to validate that they're all there and in the right format.
Yeah, and the referential integrity, I think, kind of comes in as there too. I mean, I don't think I've seen anything else offer that for YAML data, and I think that alone is a great reason for people to be curious, or at least their interest to be piqued. I won't describe that now. I think when I say referential integrity, I hope people understand what that means, and we'll definitely show it as an actual demo in a few moments. We then have the ability to convert or manipulate that data. And you've done some really cool things there, so I'll let you kind of tackle that one.
Yeah, we start with either YAML or Markdown, and we can convert it into all sorts of different things, JSON being the most obvious and basic of them. But we built a templating engine into CueBlox, so we can use Go's templates to run any sort of template over either a record set or individual records. Mm-hmm. And I've used that for some ridiculously awesome stuff. I built a template that builds bash scripts and runs the bash scripts for each record and each record set. And it's just, it's amazing how much power you have with Turing complete language. Yeah. It's a lot of fun.
I can't remember if we talked about it or you did it one day, but the Atom RSS feed, is that something, did we just talk about that? But that would be a really good use case for this as well, right?
No, we did that.
Oh,
We have an RSS feed. You name it, you can build it with the templating engine. It's really fun.
All right, moving up our pyramid, we have the shared schemata. So one of the primitives, I guess, in CueBlox is that we try to provide some functionality for you to pull in schemata that is stored in a central location, so it can be shared with other people. And the way that we do that is just by defining metadata on all of the schemata that gives it a namespace and a type. So we'll kind of explore that as we write our first schema during kind of today's session. And the custom schemata repository, I think, is just really a follow-on to that. So
yeah, if I can expand on that, though,
please do.
This is really the core of what brought us into CueBlox and building this, was getting people on the same page and making sure that my definition of an event is the same as your definition of an event. And once we share the same definitions, it makes sense to be able to publish them either privately or publicly. And so now we have the idea of creating our own schemata repositories that we can use. And everybody points at that repository, and our command line tools make that dead simple. It's as simple as a go get is in Go. We can do the same thing for a schema in Blox.
Yeah, definitely. And some of the really cool work you've been doing this week actually moves some of this functionality out of core and into plugins, which we'll get to have a really fun look at as well during today's session. And the last one is consistent aggregated team data. So, something Brian and I have been trying to think about as we build out this tooling is that, individual people may own a subset of data, but you may want to aggregate that at a team or organization level. And we want to be able to make that as easy as possible. Have I missed anything that you want to add to that?
No, I think the core of where we ended up is the idea that we have these federated independent data sets that share some properties in their schemata that allow us to aggregate pieces of them. I mean, my blog articles may not look anything like yours, but our event schema are the same. And that means that we can publish an aggregated calendar for you and I if we were on the same team. And the data would be perfectly in good shape. We wouldn't have to do anything to that data because of that. And that's really fun. That made this project well worthwhile, I think.
Yeah, I still enjoy saying schemata, just for the record. I think it's a great word.
It is a great word. And what we haven't really talked about in this whole pyramid is the myriad of tools that we've built to consume this data and to publish it. We've had a lot of fun along the way, building things that make REST APIs out of Q data automatically and GraphQL APIs. And, all of that is dead simple and one GitHub action away. So David, from minute one, has been emphatically insistent that this is GitOps. You push to a Git repository and things happen. And I think that's been a really solid goal for us, is to have Git be the source of truth for this data, and then publishing things just happen afterwards. And that's where I've had most of my fun, I think, is taking that Q data and, all right, how are we going to make this into GraphQL serverless on Vercel, or on Azure, on Google Cloud? Well, and I've had a lot of fun doing that.
Yes, 100%. All right, before we dive into the hands-on bit and we start actually playing with CueBlox, I think let's try and cement everything we've said so far with like a real-world use case for what we're actually using CueBlox for. So I think we'll try and stick with what we have in common, and then feel free to add on whatever you wish from your own project too. But okay. I think as developer advocates, we both have articles that we write that we want to publish to our website. Those articles are typically Markdown, And we now both have them living in a Git directory with a GitHub action that on every commit, it will validate the front matter on every article. And if it passes, it will output a JSON blob that can be consumed by other tooling. That JSON blob is published as a release artifact on both of our GitHub repositories. And we have, how are you using your API right now?
I'm using it in two different ways in the same blog. I'm pulling it directly out of the file system in Markdown and using MDX, and I'm also consuming it over the new API.
The serve command.
No, not the serve command. The static CDN.
Ah, nice.
So that's the plugin that I built last week, which I can show off. Plugins have been so much fun.
Yeah, I've only been keeping up with what you've shared with me on Discord, but I'm loving what I'm seeing. So it'll be cool to get a really good demo of that. So yeah, your data lives in Git. You can validate it in a GitHub action. You can publish it as an artifact, as JSON, to consume it from other tooling. We also provide Helpers to serve a GraphQL API. And it all just kind of works really nicely. So I'll share my screen again, and we will jump over to a terminal, and maybe we can just show how to get started with the tool itself. So our latest version is 0.70, released, what, 2 hours ago, 3 hours ago? At least some point this afternoon.
No, more than that.
Was it?
It was pretty early this morning, my time. It was
okay.
Maybe 6 or 7 hours ago.
Oh, we don't have a version command as a flag. There we go. Nice. And the way that you would get started with Blox is first to run a Blox init command, which is going to set up a little bit of boilerplate that just tells you where to store your schema, static assets, the data itself, and a build directory for any intermediaries or outputs that we produce as part of the Blox project.
Yeah, it's probably important to notice that this is opinionated but completely changeable. The blocks.q file has references to each of these directories, and you can change them if it suits you. And that's something that I take advantage of heavily in my blog. For example, the static directory is actually the same public static directory as my Next.js blog. So I share the static directory between the Blox repository and the website, because why not?
Yes, so this is the blocks.q, all configurable, do whatever you want, but we'll stick with the basics for today. My VS Code is crawling today. Hopefully it'll be all right. This is what happens when you use your development machine and the streaming machine at the same time. So the first thing we need to do is define a schema. So I think we'll keep this relatively simple for today's exercise, and I'm going to cheat and just have a single schema.q file. And we need to write some Q. So for anyone that's not familiar with Q, I think you're missing out. It's such an exceptional language for working with constraints across data and schema together, with some really cool abilities to query the document and do interpolation and stuff like that. I'm really impressed with Q, but it's not the focus of today's session. But this is a Q document, and in order for it to be a CueBlox schema, it requires one piece of metadata, which is something called a schema. I think it's named right, and I'll call this rawkode.demo.live. There we go. Demo. There we go. I forgot how to namespace. And a name. This will be my article schema. I think we both know the article spec pretty well, so maybe we'll run through that and touch on some of the features as we go. So this right away is valid. CueBlox would scan this directory, read this file, and say, hey, we have a namespace and we have a schema for an article. However, we've not really declared any types, any definitions, any entities, whatever you want to call them from your own background. Q denotes these through something called, well, through the hash or pound sign, depending on where you're from. But this is called a definition in Q. So here I can define a person, and I can define an article, like so. Now, in order for CueBlox to know that this definition should be consumed by CueBlox, we also need to provide data set tag, like this. And this just requires, I can't remember, does it? Yeah, I think it is required, but you have to set what the plural. Yeah. And you can also provide a supported extensions, which we'll talk about right now, I guess. I think this does default to what we consider data that we can read, which is what YAML.
YAML and Markdown.
And Markdown, yeah, perfect.
Yeah, and those extensions are YML and MD. I changed mine to add MDX too.
All right, we'll add a few in just now, and we'll show how that works. So the plural of person is going to be people, and we'll copy this down here. Now, why do we need a plural? You want to tackle that while I type?
Yeah, why do we need a plural? Because English is funny. Because we store the data in directories named after the plural. It's really that simple.
Yeah, we use it for the data directories name. It ties the clue there so that you don't have persons would be a directory name. Or if you want to expose it for GraphQL, you wouldn't. You can do cool things there too. All right. What does a person have? Let's do a really simple schema here. So
name.
For name. All right, yeah, we'll just do name. We'll keep it simple. And age. You happy with that person?
No.
No.
I would never put an age in a data field. You could put a date of birth or a year of birth, but age is immediately invalid as soon as you store it. Because time carries on.
You're 100% correct.
I also used to be a DBA.
All right, so you're going to hate it if I do title 2 then, right? And then maybe title. Okay, and then we have an article, which we're just going to give a title and a body for right now. And then we'll have a concept of an author, which right now I'm just going to do person ID. So CueBlox has a little bit of magic logic. There's nicer ways to do this, but I think we'll start off with the magic. And that anything with an underscore ID will automatically be inferred as a relationship to the person type, and we can use the referential integrity on that data to validate that it is correct. So let's throw in 2 really quick documents. So we've got the plural name here, so that's going to be people, and we'll create another directory under data called articles, and I'll create one in each. I don't know if we ever changed this, but the ID is the file name. Is that still correct?
Yes, what you would consider to be the slug. The first part of the file name is the ID.
Can you see my VS Code is telling me that the Markdown extension does not understand backspace or on key enter, and I cannot delete or press return.
Maybe you should kill that extension.
Yeah, I think I will be disabling the Markdown extension. That is particularly weird. And I'm pretty sure that's a baked in one. That's not one I install, right?
Well, you really made VS Code mad.
Yeah, I'm not sure why. Do I have Docker running? That's normally what happens.
No, you've got some Markdown stuff installed there. Oh no, those aren't the installed ones.
You can do. How do you do the weird search? Is it just installed :true? Oh, this is really struggling.
I don't know.
I'm going to use Vim. Okay. Data, people, Rawkode. Okay. Comment from Kevin in the chat. Did I break something again? It's not even Thursday yet. my computer has just been typically unhappy with me lately. I'm not sure why, but it definitely hates me. So this is a Markdown file. So we just need to indicate that it's front matter. In fact, I'll just change that to YAML because then we can show the body processing that works in CueBlox, which we haven't covered. So I'm going to modify our schemata slightly. In fact, yeah, it doesn't matter because we support both. So we need to rename this to data people rawkode.yaml. Okay, and we'll add one more, which is going to be our article, which will be hello world.md. I don't have any Markdown. I don't have any React stuff, so we'll just do that. Okay, and this requires a title, so hello world, and a body, and the body will automatically be inferred from what comes after the front matter in the document. Now, as long as I haven't messed this up, and I'm sure Brian would be in there quick if I had, we should be in a position now where we can run block build on this directory. It'll load the schemata, it will validate the data, and it'll tell us if it's good. And it worked. Okay, so what actually happened there?
Plugins. That's so sexy.
The plugins are pretty great. Yeah, really happy with that. Oh, we didn't
added those.
We didn't add the author, did we? Okay. Well, I've got a typo there, but hopefully this still works. Good. Okay, so I've now contrived a situation where the data is incorrect. Now, the Blox build by default does not handle referential integrity, but you can see from what I have in data people Rawkode, my ID, so what I'd use to reference this entity is the file name of Rawkode. However, under articles and in Hello World, we have person ID, which is loaded magically as a relationship should fail. And we can pass the -i flag. Oh, it worked.
Does it not do relationships without the relationship tag?
Did we remove that? I think I made it. I think I made it both work. All right, we're just going to pretend that gave us an error message and said that ID doesn't exist.
Add the relationship tag and show it works.
Yeah. Anyway, Brian and I weren't happy with that approach anyway, because when you expose this data to other tooling, it also has to be aware that person ID is a reference to some entity called person. And in my GraphQL API, I actually want it just to say author, like so, and still work. Now, the way that we do this through CueBlox is by using an attribute called relationship on our data and telling it the entity to join the thing too. So I'm going to go out on a limb and break this again and just hope that something that I've written here works. So now we have...
You can add that relationship tag in the data? I thought that has to go in the schema.
You are correct. Thank you. Well, should we run a Blox build and see what happens anyway? Because now we have a field that shouldn't be there, right?
Correct.
Why is we not getting error messages?
What's your schema look like?
I'm going to set it to 23. Give me one error message. No, oh, I've broken something. I'm just going to keep playing. Okay, let's modify my schemata now. Schema. And we're going to now say that we actually want this to be a relationship to person. And we don't want to use the magic IT thing. And we'll go with author. Okay. Oh, we're not getting any error messages at all.
Data set. Name and namespace. Pull up your schema again. There's got to be something wrong with the schema.
Well, the build artifact's okay. Weird. Oh, we're not getting the article. Okay.
No.
Something is wrong.
My plurals are lowercase in all of my, I don't know if that makes any difference, but just looking at my data compared to.
Okay. Build data schemata static. Schema. Maybe supported extensions as required.
Oh.
Let's find out.
It is, because if I can think of the line of code in my head, if it checks to see if the extension isn't in supported extensions, it's not going to happen.
Then what do we have in build? Okay, so it's not that. It's definitely me broken something. Maybe I should just jump to the dog food repository.
It changed the plurals to lowercase. See if that makes any difference. Maybe it won't, but
yeah, I don't think it shouldn't matter. Dataset, plural, supported extensions. Oh, and then data. Oh no, I made it worse. Someone stop me typing. I mean, come on.
Wait, don't you need, can you, person?
All right. Okay, so now we don't have articles. So I'm getting closer. Why are my articles not being loaded? I'm going to copy this. I must be doing something really silly. Yeah, I didn't load the right extension, right? Phew! Okay, so supported extensions was required. Then I spelled it supported extension, and then I got it right, but didn't include MD for it to load the file. Now I'm going to go out on a limb here, right? And I'm going to go back to the magic first. All right, let's see. Okay, so person ID blocks. Oh no, I need to update my data. In fact, I can leave that. What do you think my odds are here? Is it going to work?
I don't know.
It does. Okay. So everything works as long as I am not an idiot. Okay, so this is our let me go back into our schema, because I know I typed a lot there very fast. Right now we have author with the relationship attribute commented out. It is no longer being listened to or adhered to by CueBlox. However, we have the person ID, and anything underscore ID is a magic relationship. It will be inferred to the type where person, the lowercase version of the definition name here. And what you'll see in my data where we define the article is that we define person ID as Rawkode. And when we run the Blox build with the -i, so the -i just means verify the referential integrity, and we can ignore this. This is that field that shouldn't be allowed. It says that we have a referential integrity failure because data articles, and then the hello world article, the person ID does not exist as a person, which is perfect. So now if we come in and we fix this, and we say you are Rawkode, and we build it again with referential integrity, things will work. However, we've now got a field there that we don't want. So we'll remove the magic. We'll go back to our schemata. And I'm going to bring back the less magic, but the one that is more flexible with regards to the naming of the field. So we can use the @ syntax in Q to define a relationship where the entity or the definition is a person.
Yeah, and just to be clear about that @ syntax, that's just a tag in Q, and we're using it as arbitrary metadata. So we're creating a tag in that definition, and because the tag is relationship, we're treating that data a specific way. There's no relationship thing in Q. We built that code.
We did build that, which is probably why I'm having so much problems now. So now it's telling me that my author doesn't exist. It's @ relationship, right?
It's @ relationship and then capital person. That's how mine work.
Yeah, I tried that. It told me to go away. What have I got wrong? Oh, that's fine. I actually do have a referential integrity.
Oh,
I am making an absolute
bad
meal
data
of this.
every time.
Again, when you do things right, they just work. Okay, so we have a schema. We're defining 2 types within the system, and we can see how adding data to this works, validates the integrity, and we could take a look at the build output, which is build. I need to cat it and then put it, or I can guess I can input it. And we get this JSON blob at the other side. You'll see the body is automatically parsed through the Markdown and the front matter, so that works together really nicely. The ID and the author are all joined there. So that's now a JSON payload that you can work with in your application to consume all of those types. And you've got this guarantee that any references to other types within the system just work. Phew, that was a lot harder than it should have been.
Yeah, and this for the first couple months, this was the extent of our output. We output this data.json file, and that was what we used to build and populate everything else everywhere else. But only recently have we exposed the CUE database as an API so that we can use other tools to read that database once the validation has been completed. And that really changed a lot of things. That's what allowed us to do GraphQL and HTTP servers without exporting the data to JSON format, which saves I/O and time and processing power.
All right. I will show the serve command, and then I'll hand over to you for all the fun stuff, if that sounds good to you.
Sure.
Nuno has jumped by the chat, someone we both know. Passing by to say how amazing you both are. Thank you, Nuno. I appreciate that. Okay. I guess I could, I run GraphQL and dog food, or rather than my silly little data here. We have relationships and stuff there, don't we?
Yes, there's lots of relationships in dog food.
Okay, so we actually, this is one of Brian's really cool initiatives. Oh, there's some work I've been working on. Stash it. So Brian, you built the docs with the pyramid, and you did that all through CueBlox, which I think is really cool. So I'm going to run a Blox build here, and you'll see we have a lot of different types in our. Where do we? Oh yeah, dog food schemata. So we have a concept of an article, we have categories, we have images, we have pages, profiles, sections, and websites. Literally, our entire website is defined through CueBlox. Our articles here, and we've got some really cool stuff I guess we could talk about. We have the ability to template through attributes. So you can actually use the Blox CLI to generate new YAML and Markdown files and use the templates as initial values. Q allows you to set default values. We have our relationships here. You can even have lists as well. One more that I think is maybe quite interesting is profile. Profile has multiple types. So you can see you can define a Twitter account, a GitHub account, or a miscellaneous social account. And then social accounts can actually have an arbitrary list of any of those types. So really cool use of kind of enumerated types within Q. And we can actually generate the Twitter URL from other parameters within the Q value itself. And you can see we interpolate username into twitter.com. So the dog food directory, if you just want to learn what we're doing with CueBlox, is probably one of the best ways to do it. Let's run Blox serve. So what the Blox serve does is validate all of that data, generate a GraphQL schema, and then serve it for you over HTTP. So you'll see here, we have a server running on localhost 8080. And let's pop over here. And what's really cool is that if you don't want to use don't go to HTTPS, just go to, oh, it's redirecting. Is that Firefox being really annoying?
Could be.
Oh, come on, Firefox.
If you use 127.0.0.1, will it do the same?
Oh, I think it's just because I'm not doing, we serve it on GraphQL.
Yeah, but Firefox keeps putting that HTTPS in there because it's a word, not a number.
Where does that GraphQL thing live again? It's configurable. I just can't remember.
It is configurable.
I should have been more prepared.
Repository. Looking at the code. UI. The GraphQL UI is under /UI.
Thank you.
Which makes perfect sense, right? I'm sure I did that.
Well, there's more than one. There's this one, which is the kind of fancy UI, the playground one, and then there's the graphical one, which I can't remember where we made that live. However, we should be able to say, hey, I want all articles, and then use my autocomplete to say, give me the title, the body, and let's get a nested attribute. So we want a profile, and we want the first name and the last name. And then if we hit go, we get all our data back over GraphQL. I think this is just amazing. Like,
it really is. I got to make a huge shout out to you. You plumbed so deeply into the depths of Q to make this GraphQL handler work, and I still have zero clue how it works. This is all you, and it's some of the most amazing code I've seen put together in a long time. So kudos. This is really awesome.
Thank you. I've never blushed on my own stream before, so there you go. You're responsible for that.
Well, turning YAML into a full GraphQL dataset, that's not a small feat.
Yeah. And we'll highlight some of your work while we're at it, because I'm not going to let you throw credit this way. But this also works as serverless, but not with the serve command, right? Because you did work
Correct.
with Azure, Vercel, Netlify. I think there was one more where there is a static GraphQL JS library that can serve the build output, the build artifact from a Blox build over GraphQL too. So like, if you don't want to run servers, you can still make this work. However, you will lose access to the relationship attribute, but Brian and I are working on that too. Or you can use the Blox serve command, which builds the schema on the fly for you.
And you can also run Blox serve in all of those serverless environments, because all of the ones you mentioned support Go. So that's not hard at all. In fact, I have a repo somewhere. I don't know. I've got so many repos. I've got an example of that somewhere. We can dig it up when we're doing our show and tell.
All right, sweet. All right, well, that's CueBlox at its basics. We can initialize in your repository. We can very quickly, using Q, define our schemata. We can define the types within that schema. We can start to generate data. What was the command for that? We've got a lot of commands. Let's list them. Init. There's new, which will allow you to template, so generate new data, YAML files or Markdown files based on the schema itself. The remote commands for managing the schemata. The render one is really cool, which Brian's going to maybe play with.
Render's awesome. I'll show that off.
And plugins, which I don't know anything about. I'm going to throw that over to you to do that justice. So.
I snuck those in under the fence this last week, and David approved them. I don't even think he read the code, though. Let's be honest.
Well, yeah, I think we're in a position where we were adding a lot, and you raised this a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, that we just got a lot of code, and we need to find a way to make this to extract some of it and make it easier for other people to also contribute plugins. So
yeah,
if you want to pop your screen off, once that's there, I'll jump over to our other screen share mode, and we can show off plugins and render. But if you're watching, you have questions, you're curious about, maybe you have a use case for CueBlox and you want to know, or you want us to confirm that yes, it would be an awesome way to use it, jump it into the comments. And if anything I have covered you want a bit more detail on, just drop that in the comments too. Is that screen share coming? Is the computer behaving badly?
Well, Edge wants to control my screen or share my screen, and I have to remember what my password is.
It's then going to ask you to restart Edge, which you don't have to do. You can just say no, and it still works. I do that a lot.
Good. Later. All right, so I'm going to do a window, blocks. I cheated just a little bit, and I put a ton of projects into one workspace so that we can show them off differently, separately.
Your VS Code is now live, so feel free to take it away.
It's live. My VS Code works. So we've got that as a starting point here. This is working VS Code. And even if for some reason I could have this strange problem where backspace didn't work, I use Vim key bindings, so I could just DD and get rid of those files.
Yeah, show off.
Yeah, well, it's not so much to show off, it's muscle memory. And I blame Eric St. Martin for that. 12 years ago, he's like, you need to learn Vim. And once you learn Vim, it's really hard to unlearn Vim. Nice. All right, so one of the things that I built very recently is the idea of plugins. We have a ton of commands. Let's look at our internal command directory here. There's a ton of commands. And I was looking at the code that manages the remote repository. So Blox build and Blox serve and Blox render, that's all used in your local repository. But then we have this whole concept of a schema repository that you can create for your company or your group or your team. And there's a bunch of commands that manage that. And it feels to me like that code doesn't really belong in the same place. It doesn't belong polluting our Blox help file. It should be somewhere else. It should be a plugin. So I went down a total rabbit hole and found the HashiCorp plugin code. Let me see if I can show an example of that. And I'm really impressed with this Go plugin package. It allows you to create an interface, define an interface. And in the interface is just a contract between the caller and the thing that's called. And it uses RPC or gRPC to talk between the server and the client. And it could not have worked any easier. So I thought about it, and for the basic use cases, we really have kind of two things that we need to do. We need to have things that happen before the build and things that happen after the build. So I created pre-build and post-build as plugin interfaces. And then the Go plugin package has this concept of a magic key and a magic cookie, the key and the value. And those are just handshakes that let the client and the server know that they're both speaking the same protocol and they should be talking to each other. And like the comment says, this is not a security feature. This is more of a, are we speaking the same language and should we be talking to each other kind of feature. So we've got these handshakes configured and the interface is configured. It made it really easy to build plugins. So let's take a look at the first plugin I built. Is Blox images. And I am obsessed with serving the right size images for the screen that's on display and being able to use the height and width fields in my image tags. So I built this plugin that reads all of the files from the static directory that's declared in your CUE or your blox.q file. And it goes through and uses this, where is it? Imaging.open. So it reads the file. If it's an image, it reads the file and then modifies the YAML, or actually creates YAML, excuse me, with a file name, the height and width, and then potentially a CDN endpoint, which would be a prefix for the URL. So because this is a pre-plugin, we're actually creating data that will then be compiled and built by CueBlox. So let's look at that in practice in my blog. I've got my blocks.q in the root directory of my blog. And you can see my data and schema. All these directories are a little bit different than the demo that David showed, because I want to be able to share these directories among both CueBlox and the blog itself. So specifically, the static directory is public static. And that means that when CueBlox runs, it's going to be looking for static files in that public static directory, which is the same static directory that Next uses when it's serving images. So I've got all these images in my public static directory. If I open up a terminal, sorry, I'm on a strange keyboard. Where's the terminal thing? Here we go. I put away my loud keyboard.
Yeah, I couldn't hear you typing there. That's different. I like it.
Get rid of my custom built blog or blocks and make sure that I'm using the one that I brew installed. So by the way, Blox is available on Homebrew. You can use that on Linux or Mac OS. So if I do a Blox build, what it's going to do is run those plugins. Let's go back to my Blox queue. There's a pre-build section with an array of plugins and a post-build section with an array of plugins. So I've got a plugin called Blox Images, and the executable is Blox Images. Let's make sure that exists. It does. So if I type Blox build, it's schemata. Oh, I need to be in the data directory. What did I do?
It said that your data schemata directory didn't exist.
How can that be? Where did it go? It's really gone too. Huh. Git restore. How about that?
Uh-oh.
Yeah, that's frightening. Where's the schemata directory? I bet it got moved. Sections, look at that, see? Schemata, it got moved. I do that all the time on my laptop somehow. I fat finger and move things. All right, let's see if it's back. Oh, it's back, good news. All right, let's try that Blox build again. There we go. So you see that it's running the plugins. It registered the Blox Images plugin. It initialized it, and now it appears to be doing nothing, but what it's actually doing is blowing up because the post plugin isn't there, but that's okay. The pre-plugin actually ran, and if you look at the public static images directory, you can see this directory structure and a bunch of images, and now we go back up to my data directory, and you can see that my pre-build plugin created YAML files for each of those images that has the height and width and the file name. And because it has those, now in Next.js, in the templates for my, my website, I can specify the image information directly from that slug, or directly from that YAML file, and get the nice, pretty image tags from Next.js that does the responsive image sizing.
Very cool. I like that.
Sorry, this is the most talking I've done in 3 months since I've been on paternity leave.
Yeah,
done a lot of nursery song singing, though.
Yeah, you've only been back, what, less than a week, and I've already dragged you in front of a camera to do a stream. So, you know. Just
a couple days, yeah. So that's the pre-build plugin. It creates all of these YAML files. And then if you look in the build directory here, you can see individual data files, because that's another thing I added recently. Instead of just a single data.js JSON file, which still exists, I also break them out into both record set level data and then individual record data so that I can serve them from a CDN, and that's part of my post-build process. So that's a great segue into plugin number 2, which is static sync. Static sync takes the output either in the images or the data that's built and syncs it up to any CDN or cloud bucket that's supported by Go Cloud. So in my case, it's using Azure's blob storage with a CDN in front of it. Bucket missing. I must have.
Did you dir when you went into that directory?
mvarc. Well, I just have to be careful not to give away keys here. Static bucket, we should be there. Bucket missing. Oh, I might not be signed into Azure on this machine. I do most of my development on a different laptop, so possible that I'm just not signed in. But what this plugin does is it's actually a good example of that interface, that plugin interface being used twice. So in the main, I've got 2 different plugins defined in the same binary here. So I've got the static sync plugin and the data sync plugin, and those are each in 2 different Go files. So the data sync plugin reads the build directory, that output directory that has the data.json file. And the static plugin reads the build directory for the static directory for our images and other files. So by setting a couple environment variables and running this plugin, the output gets synced to 2 different buckets up in Azure Storage, which are fronted by a CDN. So you can go to images.brian.dev/images and get all of the images that are in this static directory. But also the build data gets output as well. So instead of wasting any time running Blox serve or spinning up some sort of Node.js server or anything else like that, I can now just call images.brian.dev/data/articles.json and get the latest articles as a JSON file, and they're cached with an appropriate time to live, and the build process automatically kills the CDN cache when I rebuild it. So really awesome and great way to take advantage of cloud storage and run one less server. So those are the 2 plugins. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think what, just to clarify, is that CueBlox doesn't try to be too opinionated on what you do with your data, but instead open up pipelines for whatever you want to do with your data. Like, we have completely different ideas of how our data works on our site, but CueBlox is still the critical bit of infrastructure in the middle that allows all of those pipelines to happen, which I think is just, I think we got the experience just right with a lot of this.
Yeah, I agree. And that was because of all of the meeting in the middle about how things should work. It's flexible enough that it handles both of our unique styles of serving and consuming data without getting in the way. And a great example of that, if you look at the GitHub workflows for the Blox project itself, in the main, this is the thing that builds CueBlox and runs Go Releaser, and it also runs our where is it? Data. Here we go. So this is the thing that publishes the data, and then also builds our websites. All of that works across the same set of data, but can push to any number of different endpoints. This particular GitHub action is pushing to Azure Static Web Apps. But we've also got some in here that push to Vercel, just as an example, because we can. And it's really fun taking that same data, using it as many different ways as you want. Here's another example of that. Let's see here. I've got this particular data set. This is my BKML library. And it's actually served by a Go binary. And this Go binary has the HTTP and GraphQL handlers that are built into CueBlox. And they're served as an endpoint, one for GraphQL and one for REST. But then I also added a image handling service that will resize images and perform image manipulation if you want to. And then also an OG image creator. So you can pass in text and it will automatically create OG images that look like this, for example, for Twitter and social media sharing. So completely different take on serving the data. And this particular one gets served by fly.io, which is an amazingly flexible service for running stuff. I'm having a lot of fun playing with Fly.
Yeah, Fly's pretty neat. Really impressed with their service as well.
Yeah, so that's a good example of taking that same data. So this is the same. It's actually a copy of the data in my blog. So it's the same data, same articles, images, whatever, and it's being served in a completely different way over Fly. So that lack of opinion in terms of how to serve the data has been a lot of fun.
All right. Shall we take a look? Sorry,
go ahead.
No, it's okay.
I just wanted to show off the templates real quick. So here's another repository. I've got a lot of these laying around with different data sets so that we can make sure we're not getting too opinionated about our own data sets and things work well with other use cases. So this one, we talked a little bit earlier about Blox Render. This one has some templates in it, and the templates build shell scripts. So if you look at the articles.text.tmpl, it will run for the articles data set. So you can see there's a range in Go's template format. So for each article, it's going to call Azure OG, which will create a OG image. And that's just a quick Go app that I wrote that does the same thing as the OG image we looked at just a second ago. So this creates a shell script that builds the OG images and then executes it. So this first one creates the shell scripts. The second one actually executes the shell scripts. And I think that's just so much fun. There's so much power in that, generating scripts and then executing them all based on the data. And then we've got, that's something I think I was just playing with. Here's one that creates OG images for each of the pages in the website. And then here's a template for the RSS feed. And that's it. There's almost nothing to it when you think about this. This is almost all boilerplate for RSS and just a tiny little bit of Go templating. And
so cool.
I didn't have to write hundreds of lines of anything to make this happen. I just ran it through the template engine. That's fun.
Yeah, definitely. I didn't know the RSS one was just sitting there in your repository, and I'm definitely going to be stealing that at some point.
Good, yeah.
But I think it's just really cool the way CueBlox gets out your way and just lets you manipulate the data in this way. And the way the render and the render subcommand with the templates works is just, it's so simple and yet so powerful at the same time. And I think that's just the sweet spot. So I really love that.
Yeah, and this repository, this is the BK API repository under GitHub Ketelsen. This one is built specifically to deploy to Vercel. So this one deploys a Vercel serverless API using the JavaScript engines. And let's look at that real quick. Here's the API. This uses that JSON GraphQL server we were talking about just a bit earlier, and then JSON server. These are two really generic services that we found just kind of screwing around on the internet one day. And JSON GraphQL takes data that almost exactly happens to be shaped like the data that we build in Blox, and it serves it as a GraphQL data set as long as it follows those same conventions of using the underscore IDs for relationals. And then JSON server does the same thing except with REST. So this is 20 odd lines of code in JavaScript that create an express endpoint with both REST and GraphQL, and also image handling in Vercel. So lots of examples of very strongly opinionated ways to serve this data in very different ways, but it's all the same tool underneath, and that's really fun.
Yeah, definitely. All right, is that everything we wanted to look at on your side? Will I pop us back over into big face mode, or?
Sure.
There we go. So, I mean, we'll wrap this up now, but I think this has been a lot of fun. Like, we haven't really spoken about CueBlox much, like publicly or on a stream. We've just been kind of iterating on it. And what I would like, the audience that are watching is to play with it and give us feedback. Like, if it doesn't fit your use case, we'd love to know why. And we're still iterating on it a lot. We want to add more features. After what I've just seen from the plugins that Brian's done, I think we're going to be adding a lot more plugins over the next kind of weeks and months. So maybe we should try and get together and just do this regularly as an update to CueBlox, maybe every other month or something like that. But I think
that's a great idea. Yeah, I've got literally a dozen plugins that I want to build. I mean, now that the plugin engine is so easy to use, I can think of just so many different plugins that I can add without polluting the Blox code base, and that makes me so happy.
Yeah, one of the ones I think you were talking about, and I think I'm really keen on us getting to work sooner rather than later, is like, leveraging all of these cloud databases that have like the free tier. Like, being able to run a Blox build and have that first validate all my YAML, Markdown, and JSON, etc., but then store it in a cloud database. And I don't need to worry about the Blox serve, and I maybe just get access to the Contentful API or the FaunaDB API or the DataStax AstroDB API. It's just there, right? Like,
yeah, there's so many, Planet Scale. There's all of these different great cloud databases that have free developer tiers that would easily serve any traffic that my blog could send it. And these plugins make it really easy for us to build an adapter that synchronizes our data. In fact, this morning I saw Supabase, which is yet another Firebase clone that is hostable both for them, and you can self-host it. And that inspired me because it has real-time eventing. So you can notify your web clients when there's new data added, and that'd be kind of fun plugin to build. Sync my Blox data up to Supabase and build my website so that when I post a new blog post, it gets up in your face and annoys you and tells you that there's a new post that you should be reading instead of the one that you were reading.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like, imagine we had like a pre-build step that checked what's changed since the last build, like using the Git history, and then propagated that through to a post step that actually fired off those, only published those changes to like Supabase or to FaunaDB, etc. I'm not sure how that would work, but I think we could make that work. I've got faith in you.
Well, I was going to say maybe it's not necessary though if we just upsert all of the data.
I was thinking about deletes.
Oh yeah.
We need to work out.
Good point.
But we for our next session, we'll have that working. I'm guaranteed about it.
Yeah, we'll think that through.
All right, awesome. Well, I hope people are interested in CueBlox. I think you like what you're seeing. Like I said, drop us comments. We're both really active on Twitter. Both our Twitter handles are on the screen, so reach out to us if you need any help. We're both in the Discord. You can ping us there. Brian's got his fancy titles. I'm going to have to steal that. I don't know how I'm going to make that work, but I want it. Any last words, Brian, before I let you go?
No, thanks for having me on. This has been great, and this is truly one of the most fun projects that I've worked on in forever. We've had such a great time iterating slowly, throwing things away, and the debate we've had about how things should work has been really educational, and I'm proud of how this is coming out and how it's evolved.
I couldn't agree more. It has been.
If folks check out CueBlox, please do let us know what your pain points are. We tried to put a lot of energy into the documentation, but some of it might be outdated. If things don't make sense or if you stumble somewhere, let us know where so we can get those docs cleaned up and make it easier for people to jump in. So much of this is locked into what we intend versus what we've written. And I hate for people to not be able to enjoy CueBlox because didn't spend enough time on docs.
Awesome. Well said. All right, Brian, thank you for joining me. Have a wonderful day. I'm sure and hopeful we will do this again soon. So thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
Bye all.